welcome back to the PC Gamer Weekender live stream. I'm still Zoe, and with me is James. We're going to chat about Mavericks Proving Grounds, but before then, we have a quick trailer to watch. So, Mavericks Proving Grounds.
Yes.
Tell me about the game.
Well, you see there sort of an indication as to the visual style of the game. It's a game that we are, moving into closed beta at summer this year. Something we've been working on for quite a while. We started Automata in the studio in 2015 with a background in sort of MMORPGs, traditional sort of MMORPGs, and really with a focus on using much more up-to-date tech to do something really ambitious, which is to sort of create something that's both sort of realistic, intuitive to play through that realism, like an action shooter, but that also is massive scale, involves a lot of players, and is, perhaps as we've seen in the title of this, like close to what is happening today with Battle Royale games, but actually very, very different in the level of simulation and strategy that we put in the world. So we're here today talking a bit about sort of the world simulation side of things, a bit of a reveal about how sort of the depth and the scale that we're doing in terms of environmental effects, what the player can do to interact and affect the environment, and sort of how they can, how we sort of are delivering a gameplay experience which consistently has sort of strategy throughout that, while still being in this sort of really sort of fun, engaging action format of like sort of last man standing style battles. So yeah, we're sort of what we consider being like a very next generation shooter, a kind of different take on what a session is for a shooter. I mean, I think games recently have gotten close to that idea of playing with a lot of players in a really fun, compelling battle, but they're in the very early stages. So what this project is all about is pushing way further in terms of simulation and strategy in these games, and also still leveraging a lot more of what we've seen from sort of MMO kind of games in the past. We have a persistent social hub, we have character development, lots more kinds of progression in the game. So this year, yeah, we're coming out with our sort of competitive Battle Royale style mode, which we hope will show that there's so much more for that genre than what people have seen today, with how much more we can do with the game world and the sort of game mode as a whole. And then we're expanding further into this sort of open world, persistent game area, this complementary sort of game type next year, where you can also play in the format of an open world persistent RPG. So yeah, so it's sort of two-stage release, but for us, like, we're very excited for what we're doing this year. And yeah, we're really looking forward to sort of entering our initially closed beta for just a lot of feedback, because this sort of game, we have a lot of new kinds of technology in this game. The approach and how we built it is nothing like the games on the market today. And we'll talk a bit, of course, about the server simulation, what we've done with the graphics engine. Really, really sort of new tech, new stuff, new approach. But of course, you need to complement that with a lot of feedback. These sorts of games are about a lot of players, and we're really, like, as a studio, we're focused on being able to react to that and develop the game over time based on feedback.
So your Battle Royale mode has 400 players in it? Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, with Battle Royale, it's important to just get the players right, also based on the game type and what's compelling, what makes the right length of session. So we can support more than that. We can do over 1,000 players. It also depends on like what areas of the map you're using. It makes no sense to put loads of players right next to each other, and there are limits there. But yeah, like in our Battle Royale, the 400 players for 4-player game type, 100 players for individuals going in. That's the scale we're at the moment, and it's something we're still playtesting. But yeah, we think that's working really well at the moment.
How do you envisage that working with 400 players on one map? Like teamwork going in some corners, straight up one-to-one in others? Like,
I mean, I think with the map, it also depends so much on the structure, because in an open map that's just fields, like, it's a very different story to have 400 players all looking at each other than it is to have different kinds of levels of foliage, of obstacles, of houses, of buildings. So I think we ought to bear in mind that compared to these sorts of game types that people have played so far, because we have a lot more in the world simulation, and in fact, like one of our big principles is that we don't just lay out a map that's big. Like we have a huge map, but it's built out of these components which are designed almost like traditional FPS levels, like much more thought into the tactics, how you approach angles, things like that, and we're sort of building those modular pieces out into a big world. And by doing that, it changes how many players makes the game the most compelling, because you have these different phases of the game. You might all go in and have 1,000 players, but at the end of the day, like it also depends massively on how quickly they're pushed together. You get real peaks and troughs in terms of even seeing a player. You might have a 100-player game and see one other player. And I think that we're really approaching this by saying, look, yes, like we are here to embrace larger number of players like than what's been seen before, but it's also about how those players move and creating a lot more points of gameplay, because we're not here to enforce people too much to sort of play against a certain strategy. This is a game all about emergent strategy, but at the same time, there are more objectives, more things to do throughout the game than what you might be used to from a simpler, straightforward, like just last man standing, open match.
Kill everyone scenario, not that kind of thing. So what kind of objectives can players expect then?
Well, I don't want to give away all the details of the game type, but really rather than just being, just collapsing static world in effect, not only are there like a lot more ways to interact with every kind of part of the world, so you leave trails, you have the reactive foliage, wildlife, destructible, siegeable buildings, but also like as these players are brought together, they're not just brought together by one simple thing that's forcing you together, but by objectives that can make you stronger. We're trying to encourage people to take risks throughout the game and not just sort of have a lot of fun when they initially, a lot of fun maybe towards the end, and it just to be a bit dead in the middle. So, and that's also reflecting how and what you gain from a game. Like we have sort of the competitive game type, and the way we reward you if you are playing in a sort of format with a clan, and it's all about winning multiple times over in a way. But then just in the open world, just the queuing online, like you can get rewarded by going in, and you might not be the last man standing, you might have achieved a lot in that session, and we recognise that as well through our persistent social hub, the rewards you get. You don't enter Mavericks just through a menu, like you enter it through the game world with players around you with a persistent capital. So yeah, our take on this game is quite different to what's on the market today, and we expect that there's so many different areas in which we're new in terms of our approach. We're much more from the view of like creating massively multiplayer experiences that are really fun and engaging through what players do with each other and learning from that. So I think we're set up to evolve a lot in a way with our gameplay, and we've talked quite a bit so far about using techniques like machine learning and new kinds of progression systems that really complement what people enjoy about the game, and us continuously evolving that. So I think the biggest thing that we're doing here is taking a very different approach to this sort of game. And I think there's so much, like we've seen recently over the last couple of years, like even games that are very, very basic, but they just involve a lot of players, can be a lot of fun. And we're all about setting ourselves up for, what is that most compelling gameplay. We're adding a lot more gameplay elements into this game than have really ever been done in a game that's massive scale. Like you may have seen really awesome levels of destruction and interactive, elements to and well-designed maps in like small games, well not small games, but small maps, like symmetric maps, things that have been really well thought through. To bring that to scale is something that hasn't really been done before, so that's the journey that we're on.
It sounds like a very intense journey. So you mentioned earlier like foliage and tracking and stuff, and a big part of that I guess is your spatial OS technology. So could you tell me a bit more about how that kind of affects the gameplay?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago we did start building out our networks technology, which enables players to sort of enables us to basically scale up without being constrained to like one server, things like that. What we found was that we as a studio wanted to focus on the game-specific side of that. So we partnered with Improbable, who builds Spatial OS, and that's literally their technology is all about structuring your game servers in a completely different way, and it fit completely with the approach that we wanted to take to build this game. So it was a very fortuitous sort of partnership. And so what happens is Spatial OS handles what you'd normally think of as the game server, but it's not a game server. It's a lot of different workers spread throughout the whole world, and they grow and shrink to make sure that you can always simulate bullets, physics, like really, really fast, high resolution, so you don't end up with these problems that you can sometimes get in these current sort of large open world shooters, where if a lot of people start doing stuff, or like just in general, they have worse latency problems than you'd expect, like lower fidelity in their shooting and things like that. Spatial OS is a very different approach in terms of how we build servers, and the key to that is that we're not constrained by sort of the number of players we have in the world and how busy certain areas get, because our sort of whole cloud of servers responds to like where the action is in the game. So like growing and shrinking servers. Also, it allows us as a development studio to focus on representing the world in the best way, and then Spatial OS takes that and allows us to have millions of entities like houses, trees, everything else, handles all of the sort of storage and the core level of networking that, and then we focus on tying that in to a really, as you see in sort of our visual demonstration there, really quite realistic high-end graphics, and we focus on that bridge between the two as a studio, where you wouldn't classically have thought it was possible to have something look really high res and be really dynamic at the same time as being a huge scale. So we focus on basically taking what Spatial OS is great at and allowing your game client to sort of only need to worry about what's around you and the specific details about what you care about in the distance. So I scope in when I sight over there, and then I instantly find out what's over in that direction in the detail I need, as opposed to just have to know everything all the time. So it's really like, it's a combination of a very different approach to the game client, which allows your single client to render stuff in really great detail, but also just because we're doing so much, we can't just have one game server. We have this Spatial OS, we use a sort of Spatial OS cloud.
So I guess the other side of all the amazing graphics that are going to go on in the Spatial OS technology is the player-driven narrative, which you've mentioned before. So
yes.
Can you explain to me how that's kind of going to come about?
So the narrative is something we're looking to launch much more within our sort of RPG context next year. We're doing, we think we have a lot to do in this sort of session-based gameplay. The narrative is going to be there from the beginning. It's about, it ties into how we're doing clans, progression in the game, making the world also feel, you know, more real, like having that variety to it. You know where you are in the world, and you can use that tactically this year. But we are also incorporating the story next year much more strongly in an RPG sense, where we have factions and allegiances. That all ties in much more with our open world persistent gameplay. That's something which, you know, we're launching as a second step, because you know, for us the priority is build that really great strategy action experience with lots of players, and then, you know, put in all of that resource to fill out all of that sort of NPC detail and world story detail in the map, sort of as a second step. But yeah, then the narrative there is about, you know, we think this is a game type that can be enjoyed both in the sort of session-based format and in a very open world format. And so we're experimenting a lot this year with our sort of machine learning techniques we talked about, which are ways to do dynamic gameplay that sort of learns based on what players do, what's more fun, and enabling that to happen. So yeah, we see this as a really long-term project. You know, like we wanted to develop this over 10 years, and you know, there's a narrative component to that, which players are also going to be involved in, where what they do in the open world is going to affect the narrative and vice versa. Yeah. I think that, you know, this is a very broad product, and it has both of those components to it. But I would say what we're focusing on more than anything right now is that sort of action gameplay, getting the core elements really fun.
Yeah. So part of that core element is obviously going to be different components in the world, like whether it's a forest that you're walking through, or like some ruined buildings. Like, what kind of scenery can players expect to see when they first log in?
Yeah, so it's sort of this sort of Northern English, Scottish kind of like landscape. It's based on that, and you have denser areas of foliage, you have more open areas, you have the beaches, you have you know, grass, higher up mountains. There's quite a variety of terrain sort of biomes there. But I think even beyond that visual identity from the sort of terrain, there's also we spend a lot of time building the map out of gameplay elements. So we don't just place trees. We think about what directions players might come through those things, and we think about like how you could use the environment to your advantage. I think that's something that, you know, will evolve more over time. So what we've done actually is, we built out a large world over like 16 kilometer diameter, this sort of 12 kilometers squared of playable area, we also have a smaller component of that around the capital, the social hub, of sort of 500 meters by 500 meters, where we've been doing a lot of testing as to how this plays out, of the core sort of modular elements that make up a fun section of the map, whether that's like, okay, then we know in this box here, we've tried this number of approach angles, or like this is the point of maybe holding this high ground or low ground. So we tried out a lot of tactics, and now we sort of are learning from that and spreading it throughout the map. So interestingly, and throughout our closed beta and going into launch this year, we're expecting to continuously evolve how we use those elements. So yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of work that goes into complementing both sort of design and the terrain, making it look sensible, know where you are on the map, but not really having dead parts of the map where it's just a field.
Yeah.
I mean, not that just a field is always a problem, like we have that as well. But yeah, we see it as a bit of an evolutionary process. I think we have a really good starting point, and we've done a lot more than I think what other people are playing at the moment. But at the same time, that's why we sort of have this two-phase approach where we're developing the strategy of the world for that first year, and that's bleeding into then sort of narrative RPG as well for people who are interested in that. But this whole time it's about player involvement as well, which is why we're starting with our betas, this year fairly early on, and then we're going on to have this sort of narrative where players affect the world and things evolve from there.
Sounds like that'll be almost as good for sightseeing as it is for shooting people, so it's very promising.
Yeah,
great.
Hopefully.
Thanks so much for talking to me, James, about it. So up next we have the DRG initiative. Make sure to tune in 10 minutes to catch up, see what that's about.